Good morning, and welcome to the National Archives, this wonderful building. My name is Maureen Bunyan, and I am from ABC Television News here in Washington, ABC 7, and it's my great privilege to be here as your host for this fabulous program on this beautiful 4th of July. Welcome to all of our out-of-town guests. Welcome to Washington, and welcome to all of you who live in the beautiful Washington metropolitan area. Thank you for joining us. As you may know, the National Archives is the permanent home of the Declaration of Independence. For more than 30 years, it has hosted a patriotic ceremony on July 4th to celebrate our independence. This is the kickoff event for all of the patriotic activities in the nation's capital today. After our ceremony, please stay right where you are to enjoy the National Independence Day Parade down Constitution Avenue. And this evening, the National Symphony will perform a Capitol Fourth, a live concert from the U.S. Capitol, followed by fireworks on the National Mall. So stay around, celebrate, enjoy our independence. Now, I ask you to please rise for the presentation of the colors by the 3rd United States Infantry Old Guard Continental Color Guard, with Evan Hughes singing the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Now, to give us a taste of the atmosphere of colonial America, we have with us the United States Army Old Guard Fife and Drums, Their uniforms are from the era of the Revolutionary War, and so is their music. It's my great pleasure to present Sergeant First Class Richard Ruddle to narrate their performance. Please join me in welcoming the Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The United States Army Military District of Washington, under the command of Major General Carl Horst, is proud to present the United States Army Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps. The 3rd United States Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard, traces its lineage back to the 1st American Regiment of 1784, and today serves as the Army's official escort to the President of the United States. In 1960, the Fife and Drum Corps was organized to participate in official ceremonies and to revive our country's musical heritage. As one of the Army's premier musical organizations, the unit performs for visiting dignitaries and heads of state at the White House and throughout our nation's capital. In addition, the Corps travels extensively, averaging 500 performances annually. This year, the Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps celebrates its 50th anniversary, marking 5 decades of dedication and commitment to the United States Army and the nation. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the United States Army Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps. Ladies and gentlemen, the United States Army Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps. From the days of the American Revolution through the 19th century, Army field musicians played a vital role in maintaining good order, discipline, and morale. The sounds of the fife, bugle, and drum signaled troop movements in battle and regulated everyday activities in camp. The soldiers of the Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps wear uniforms patterned after the musicians of George Washington's Continental Army. In order to be easily identified, military musicians of the period wore the reverse colors of the regiment to which they were assigned. In 1784, infantry soldiers of the 1st American Regiment wore blue coats with red trim. Thus, the musicians of the time wore red coats trimmed in blue. Traditionally, the most skilled drummer was given the title of drum major and was chosen to lead the musicians. The drum major who stands before you today wears the customary mark of the drum major, the baldric, holding 2 drumsticks. He also wears the light infantry cap, the red waist sash, and issues silent commands with an espontoon, an 18th century weapon. Listen now as the Corps features the fife, bugle, and drum, bringing to life the sights and sounds of our country's musical heritage. Much like today, field musicians in colonial times sounded reveille at daybreak, signaling to the camp to rise for the day. During the 18th and 19th centuries, reveille was not just a single call, but a series of tunes performed in a military manner. The Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps will now salute you with a medley of reveille music, concluding with their signature melody, Yankee Doodle. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, the United States Army Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps. On behalf of the Old Guard Commander, Colonel David Anders, and the Fife and Drum Corps Commander, Chief Warrant Officer Frederick Elwine, it has been our pleasure performing for you today.
Thank you so much, Sergeant Ruddle, and thank you so much to the Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps. Now, the National Archives works every day not only to preserve the actual Declaration of Independence, but also to preserve the ideals it defines. As the Archives cares for the records of our democracy and makes them accessible to the public, they also help ensure the rights of individuals and the accountability of government as the hallmark of democracy. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you a very important person, the person to whom our nation has entrusted the care of our Declaration of Independence. He is also responsible for 10 billion, that's B, billion, pages of records, and along with his staff, he is the person who decides which of the millions and millions of documents that the federal government produces are saved and become part of the written record of our nation's history. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. David Ferriero, the archivist of the National Archives. Mr. Ferriero.
Good morning, and welcome to the National Archives. Thank you all for coming to help us celebrate the 234th anniversary of the day the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. It's nice to see so many of you coming to downtown Washington to observe the nation's birthday and to celebrate in a setting like no other in America, because there is no other city like the capital of the great nation that came into being that summer of 1776 in Philadelphia. As you all may know, the Continental Congress actually declared independence from Great Britain on July 2nd, but didn't adopt the Declaration of Independence until July 4th, and that has become the day we celebrate. Before we go any further, I want to recognize some of the special friends of the National Archives who are with us this morning. Representative Lacey Clay of Missouri, Representative Michael Turner of Ohio, and Representative John Larson from Connecticut are with us this morning. Many members of the Foundation of the National Archives Board are with us also this morning, including Ken Laurie, the board president, and our friends from John Hancock Financial Services who have guaranteed the success of this event for so many years. And finally, my thanks to the 3,000 employees of the National Archives in 44 facilities around the country who every day ensure that the records of our country are collected, protected, and made available. This is a very special day for all of us at the Archives. In coming together every 4th of July, we celebrate our democracy and how it has survived attacks by the British, our own Civil War, the wars of the 20th century, and various constitutional crises over the decades. And like our democracy, the Declaration of Independence has had to survive wars and crises, as well as poor treatment and careless display. It first had to survive the Continental Congress. Thomas Jefferson was at work drafting the Declaration well before the Congress declared independence on July 2nd, 1776. And after a few changes by John Adams and Benjamin Franklin, the draft went to the delegates. The Congress began debating the draft on July 2nd. The delegates cut out about a fourth of what Jefferson wrote, but retained the central ideas. Finally, on July 4th, it was done. Cheers went up and church bells rang out in Philadelphia. Several weeks later, Congress ordered the Declaration written on parchment, and on August 2nd, most of the 56 founding fathers reassembled and signed it. And that is the document that sits inside this building. Then came the Declaration's long fight for survival. During the Revolutionary War, the rolled-up Declaration moved from city to city as Congress moved itself to avoid capture from the British. In 1789, the Secretary of State took custody as the nation began under the present Constitution, but the Declaration still moved as the capital moved from Philadelphia to New York and finally to the new city of Washington. Each time it was used, then moved, it was unrolled and rolled up again. When the British came to destroy Washington in 1814, the State Department clerks hurriedly wrapped some of the government's most cherished documents, including the Declaration, in bags of linen for safekeeping outside the city. First, they hid them in an unused grist mill near Chain Bridge in Virginia, then in a private home in Leesburg until the war was over. But the hands of time were taking their toll on the Declaration, and it was noticeable. In 1820, Secretary of State John Quincy Adams ordered a man named William Stone to engrave a facsimile of the Declaration. Prints were made from it. The original stone graving from 1823 and a print from it are on permanent display inside, a few steps from the rotunda at the entrance to our public vaults. Throughout the 1880s, the Declaration was on exhibit for long periods at several places in Washington. In each case, it was exposed to sunlight, fluctuating temperatures, and humidity, all of which took their toll on the document. Finally, officials took note of the effects of the aging and carefully wrapped the Declaration and stored it flat at the State Department, where it joined the Constitution. But in 1921, President Harding signed an order transferring both documents to the Library of Congress. There they went on display again, subjecting the Declaration to more light and humidity. Even before the National Archives building was constructed, many people believed that the Declaration belonged here, where the Bill of Rights was scheduled to be displayed. President Roosevelt and the first archivist of the United States, Robert Connor, had agreed the Declaration and Constitution belonged in the archives. Such a move, however, was strongly opposed by the Librarian of Congress, World War II interceded, and just before Pearl Harbor, the library sent the Declaration and Constitution to Fort Knox, Kentucky, for safekeeping alongside our nation's gold bullion. The documents remained there until September 1944, when they were returned to their permanent display in the Library of Congress. And finally, 1952, archivist Wayne Grover and the new Librarian of Congress, Luther Evans, agreed that the documents should be in the archives, and plans were made for their transfer. And in December of '52, with great ceremony and heavy guards, the two newly encased documents were carried up the steps, these very steps, into the rotunda. And they remained in the rotunda until 2001, when they were removed by our conservation staff to perform long-planned, careful conservation treatment on them, and prepared them for their return to the rotunda in September 2003 in their new state-of-the-art encasements. And the Declaration of Independence was safe for a year, until 2004, when the good treasure hunter, Nicolas Cage, cleverly stole it during a party in this building. Stole it to protect it from an evil treasure hunter. Our national treasure was miraculously and circuitously restored to its rightful place. And now poses the most often asked question in the rotunda. Can we see the map on the back? I can tell you for certain that the only thing on the back of the Declaration are the words, Original Declaration of Independence, dated 4th July, 1776. Nothing more. There is a mystery, however, on the front of the document. The lower left-hand corner has the distinct handprint. Whose we do not know, but we're looking for early, very early photographs to at least determine when it first appeared. So spread the word and see what you can do to help us. And the Declaration has not been forgotten in the digital age. Just this past week, the online magazine Slate joined forces with Twitter to host a contest to reduce the Declaration of Independence to a single tweet. That meant reducing its 8,000 or so characters to only 124. And here are some of my favorite entries. You should have listened. We're out of here. Thanks. Bye. Don't tax me, bro. Hey, King George, this being your colony isn't working for us, so get lost. It's the taxes, stupid. And my favorite, we are updating to USA 1.0. All Taxes T soldiers previously compatible with English 2.0 will not work with USA 1.0. All about as far from Jefferson's elegant prose as you can get. But the idea, the essence of the Declaration remains that all men are created equal, that governments derive their powers from the consent of the government and from the governed, and that everyone is born with certain unalienable rights, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Even a tweet such as, "You're not the boss of me," retains the essence of Jefferson's message, if not his manner of delivering it. 234 years later, the parchment has faded, but the spirit of the Declaration has not waned. It lives on in our daily lives. Today and this weekend, millions of Americans will be celebrating the 4th in parades and patriotic gatherings all over the nation, just as we are celebrating along the National Mall. The message of the Declaration still moves us, and its words help unite us as a people on this, its 234th birthday. Thanks to all of you for joining us today and helping us fulfill John Adams' prediction that this day be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, and bonfires and illuminations, from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward, forevermore.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ferriero. Thank you so much. Now, let us listen to those immortal words of Liberty as we read aloud the Declaration of Independence. And for that, I'm happy to introduce you to a very distinguished group of people who will read the Declaration. First, we are very pleased to have with us today two special guests, and I would like to ask them to please stand and wave when I call their names. Congressman William Lacey Clay, first elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in the year 2000. Also, Julie Harris, the Director of Public Policy at Chavez Public Charter School in Washington. Next, to read the grievances against King George III, the guy who wasn't the boss of us anymore, we have three of the leaders of the Second Continental Congress, Mr. Thomas Jefferson, Mr. John Adams, and Dr. Benjamin Franklin. Gentlemen, please stand. These three gentlemen know the words of the Declaration better than anyone else because Mr. Jefferson wrote the first draft, Mr. Adams and Dr. Franklin make changes to it, and finally, to read the names of the 56 signers of the Declaration, we are happy to have with us Private Edward Ned Hector, a free black colonial soldier, respected patriot, and hero of the 3rd Pennsylvania Artillery Company. Ladies and gentlemen, the Declaration of Independence.
In Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous Declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness.
Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security.
Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world.
He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good.
He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them.
He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only.
He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures.
He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people.
He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within.
He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose, obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands.
He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers.
He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries.
He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance.
He has kept among us, in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislatures.
He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power.
He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with the power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever.
He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us.
He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people.
He is, at this time, transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous of ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation.
He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands.
He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions.
In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people.
Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. We must, therefore, acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and holds them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends.
We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that the United Colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. That they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do.
And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
Thank you so much, Congressman William Lacey Clay, Julie Harris, Mr. Jefferson, Mr. Adams, and Dr. Franklin. It is stirring to hear those words just as they were written 234 years ago. It's my pleasure now to invite Private Hector to read the names of the colonies and the signers of the Declaration. Now, in colonial times, it was customary to show one's approval by boldly shouting, "Huzzah!" So, after Private Hector reads all of the names of the signers, we have to show our approval by shouting, "Huzzah!" Let's try it one more time. 1, 2, 3, huzzah! I think we should do that again because some of you aren't showing enough enthusiasm, and you might be put on the boats back to England if you don't do any better. So let's get a little more energy. We want to hear huzzah heard all across the Washington area. 1, 2, 3, huzzah! All right, that's more like it. Now, Private Hector is going to read the names of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. Please, no huzzahs while he's reading. Let's save it all up for the last big huzzah as he finishes reading the names from each state. Private Hector.
First, the Honorable John Hancock of Massachusetts, President of the Continental Congress. I appreciate your enthusiasm. Charles Thompson of Pennsylvania, his secretary. New Hampshire, Josiah Bartlett, William Whipple, Matthew Thornton. Massachusetts Bay, Samuel Adams, John Adams, Robert Treat Payne, Elbridge Gary, Rhode Island, Stephen Hopkins, William Ellery, Connecticut, Roger Sherman, Samuel Huntington, William Williams, Oliver Wolcott, Georgia, Button Gwinnett, Lyman Hall, George Walton, Maryland, Samuel Chase, William Paca, Thomas Stone, Charles Carroll of Carrollton, Virginia, George Wythe, Richard Henry Lee, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Harrison, Thomas Nelson Jr., Francis Lightfoot Lee, Carter Braxton. New York, William Floyd, Philip Livingston, Francis Lewis, Lewis Morris. Pennsylvania, Robert Morris, Benjamin Rush, Benjamin Franklin, John Morton, George Clymer, James Smith, George Taylor, James Wilson, George Ross. Delaware, Caesar Rodney, George Reed, Thomas McCain. North Carolina. William Hooper, Joseph Hughes, and John Penn. South Carolina. Edward Rutledge, Thomas Hayward Jr., Thomas Lynch Jr., Arthur Middleton. New Jersey. Richard Stockton, John Witherspoon, Francis Hopkinson, John Hart, and Abraham Clark. And to this, the people say, Huzzah!
Thank you so much, Private Hector. Did you like saying huzzah? Feels so good, doesn't it? You want to do one more time? All right. 1, 2, 3, huzzah! Fabulous. Thank you. I think they could hear you all the way back to England.